Okay, welcome everybody. Apologies for any technical issues that you might have just been privy to. We do apologise for that, but thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We do have a very exciting topic to discuss and a great panel of speakers who I will shortly hand over to. Today's webinar is the first instalment of the Pan-African Data Centres 2026 webinar series, and it's in collaboration this year with the Africa Data Centres Association and Rising Advisory Africa. So over the coming months, we're going to be touching upon a number of different topics that the conference in June plans to address. And we'll also be discussing across the series the recently released Data Centres in Africa 2026 report and its findings. Today, we're set to dive into the African data centres market to try and understand what's been happening and what's on the horizon for 2026 and beyond. My name is Amy Hopkinson, and I'm the conference producer of the Pan-African Data Centres event. And just a gentle reminder that the event is once again being held in Johannesburg on the 23rd to the 24th of June. Today's webinar is entitled The Pan-African Data Centres Market, Opportunities, Challenges and Direction of Travel. If you have any questions during the webinar, do put these into the chat box. We'll try our best to get to them if we've got time. Once the webinar's finished, it will be available as on-demand content via the event website. That's www.datacenters-africa.com. And now I'm very pleased to hand you over to Mark Acton and to our esteemed panel of speakers.
Thanks very much, Amy, and thanks to StepX for the opportunity to talk to everybody, and thanks everybody for joining us for this session. I'm just going to ask the panelists to very briefly introduce themselves before we kick things off. So if I may, Stefan, could you sort of introduce yourself, explain who you are, what you do, and then we'll move through and finish with Paul-Francois.
Thank you, Amy and Mark. Hello, everyone. I have basically been leading data center operators.
Adam Sandler showed photos of himself and Javal from their time filming.
I think somebody's got a mic open. Could you mute yourselves, please, so we can hear each other? Thank you.
So just saying that. Been leading data center operators in Europe and Africa for the past 25 years. That includes managing director for Telecity in France, who at the time was the largest data center operator in Europe. Director for Europe for Global Switch, leading France, Germany, Netherlands, and Spain. And I've also been subsequently the CEO for Africa data centers, and I am now consultant and senior advisor to major infrastructure funds, and also advisor to actors of the data center ecosystem.
Thanks, Stefan. And Menno.
Okay, well, I'm Menno Parsons. I'm South African. I feel like I'm playing the World Cup rugby against two French and one Englishman. But yeah, so we against the big dogs in Europe, for example. But so Menno Parsons, Masterpower Technologies, and we've got to come data center business as well, Digital Parks Africa, and some edge type players. And so been very involved in data centers throughout Africa with the telcos, with data center companies, and yeah, the exciting journey forward and the mix that's coming. Listening to all the conferences and being to all the places all over the world with where Mark and Stefan and Paul basically been. Yeah, so it's interesting what's happening at the moment.
Thanks, Menno. And finally, Paul-Francois. So please introduce yourself, but also please go on and explain the report that we've recently had published, the Africa Data Centres Economic Report, which I think you're going to be doing a brief presentation on, and explaining what the report is and where people can get it, etc. So if you kick us off with that, please, Paul-Francois.
Okay, so I'm Paul-Francois Cattier, I learned my lesson on data center by leading during almost 10 years the Schneider Electric strategy, global strategy on data center, and deploying this strategy to serve our customer. But after I founded with Wouter van Hulten from Interaction Africa Data Center Association in 2018, I retired in 2020, and they asked me to be the managing director of the Africa Data Center Association. So this is what I'm. And every year we are publishing a report for the state of the data center market, which is in Africa, which is quite not easy task because each country is very specific and you have 54 countries. But I will try to give you some flavor of what is the African data center market today. So first, to understand the Africa data center market, you need to know that 90% of the data generated in Africa by the African citizen are computed outside Africa. So this explains a lot the situation of the data center market in Africa. And it's very clear. Next slide, Amy, please. It's very clear due to this reason, that the data center is a strategic sector for African government. First, due to this reason of the data of African citizens being computed outside Africa, is the data sovereignty, which is strategic for African government. So strategic that in 2026, you have 40 African nations over 54 that have enacted data protection legislation. And you have another 5 countries that are currently drafting this legislation. So it will be 45 over the 54 countries that will have data protection legislation to protect the African citizen data here. So protect the data means this data has to be protected by the local law of each country. So this is very important to have a localized data center infrastructure and to compute the IT load in Africa. The second big driver to have this strategic sector for African is the performance, latency, times that drive performance. Africa is a huge continent. You can put in Africa all together USA, China, India, Europe, and Japan all together in the continent. So you can imagine the latency time that can occur if your data is computed outside Africa, or if you are your data is computed by one part of Africa if you reside in another part, and so on. So latency time is really a big driver of the African data center industry. After, also it's strategy because there is already some gap with Africa regarding the rest of the world in internet access, in internet usage, and so on, and they don't want to take too much delay about the adoption of AI. So there is an AI strategic framework. We have recently had the establishment of a $60 billion Africa AI fund to catalyze continental innovation. So this is very key. And you have 15 countries in Africa that now have formalized national AI strategy to align local ecosystem with global standard. So this is really to make you understand how the government, African government, see the data center infrastructure as something really very strategic for the future of the economic development of Africa. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I would like to see you some figure about the African data center market. So, as you can see, it's data center capacity of 350 megawatt, which is quite small compared to the size. You understand that 360 megawatt represents 0.6% of the global data center capacity to operate IT load for 20% of the global population. So you have a 40 time gap compared to the rest of the world. Of course, if all the African data were computed in the continent, on the African continent, you will need at least 3.6 gigawatt to perform this IT load, okay? But even 3.6 gigawatt, it's 6% of the global data center capacity for 20% of the population. And this population will be, in 20 years from now, 35% of the global population. So there is a big gap to catch up in Africa. Above these 360 megawatts that are installed capacity, you have 240 megawatts that are under construction so far. So it will be in 27, something like 600 megawatt installed data center capacity in Africa. And this is to compare to the when we did a forecast in 2020 at Africa Data Center Association that we would need at least 700 megawatt of installed data center capacity at the end of the decade, and we will be 600 megawatt in 2027. So it's above the forecast, I would say. As well, you have to understand that there is a pipeline of planned data centers, which are not under construction yet, but in the planning phase of 650 megawatts. So it will bring the data center capacity in 2030, 2031 at something like 1.3 gigawatt, which is something similar to France today, for example. So it's still, with this 1.3 gigawatt, we will still in Africa be around 0.6% of the global data center capacity. The second thing is that you have also, so you understand that the IT generated in Africa, IT load or data generated in Africa is not computed in Africa, but there is other issue regarding the coverage. You have an excellent connectivity in Africa, surrounding Africa with sea cable coming, fiber undersea cable coming around Africa with a huge capacity and no issue on this. But the issue is that you have 17 countries that have no coastal, no coast, who are landlocked country, landlocked nation, and you need to develop a terrestrial fiber network to reach this country, and after, of course, to reach the populations that are sometimes very far away from the capital city and so on. So we did in Africa a huge effort to catch this gap. It was 5 years ago, we had 900,000 kilometers of terrestrial fiber network. Now we are 1.3 million kilometers of terrestrial fiber network, but we need really to double this number very quickly, and it's a huge investment. The other divide is the usage gap. You have to just to see that a connectivity cost, which is something like $30, $40 per month, is 25% of monthly income of the average monthly income in Africa. So it's very difficult for a lot of people in Africa to pay this amount to have the connection. And those who can do it, they most of the time limit the consumption of the volume or the time they are using internet access and so on. And there is a 64% usage gap with Europe and Africa. Of course, this is average around Africa. You have very different situation from country to country. You have country around $6,000-7,000 US individual GDP, like South Africa, 12,000 US in Gabon of individual GDP, and you have country with 3,000 US or more, like Ivory Coast or Senegal, or 2,000 and a half US in Kenya or Nigeria. So There is a lot of difference between the different countries, but as an average, this is the situation. Then next slide, I would like to make a quick view of the Africa data center investment model. So we have the classical segmentation of data center, wholesale and hyperscale. Sovereign is government data center, and niche, which are more the research, university, meteorological data center, connectivity hubs like internet exchange, and managed services with small integrators that are hosting the server of the and service and doing services of the IT of their customer and so on. So this is a classical strategic segmentation. We don't have yet the big AI factories that we start to have in US or Europe. It's still not there. We have some experiment. We have some data centers starting, not as a whole data center, but more as experiment as an island of high density AI. In terms of financing, you see that most of the time, 10 years ago in Africa, it was mainly development finance institutions, DFIs, that were financing data center, or some private investor who were really adventuring themselves into this domain. This is changing. As you can see, the figure below the different DFI, private equity, banks, there is a move, there is a shift towards more private equity, towards more banks investment, more hyperscaler coming in, and so on. And this is showing that the African data center market and finance model, investment model is maturing and is becoming much more interesting for the usual financing. And this is good news for the African data center market. Next slide and last slide of my short presentation, really to see some of the challenge. You understand that energy and sustainability are, of course, a challenge in the global data center world, with the AI factory in US and Europe, who is really putting the utility in a big challenge to serve their citizens, their businesses, and the data center, AI data center. We have the same type of challenge in Africa. First, they have in Africa utilities, they have a challenge that don't have the rest of the world, which is a growing population, passing from 1.5 billion to 3 billion in 20 years, is putting a lot of pressure on the utility, because it's going with more industrialization of Africa as well. And on top of this, you have to forecast the energy for the data center and the connectivity, which is a huge demand as well. So it's very tough. It's one of the toughest issue in Africa data center is this energy. And very often people will pick up a place, of course, where there is businesses where they can develop their revenue and their business and so on for the data center. Of course, you need a lot of connectivity when you want to find a site for your data center. You need water as well, but you need to make sure that you will have enough energy. And so people are looking at sites where you are close to hydro, you are close to geothermal field, like in the Rift Valley. There is a lot of geothermal site to pick up the right thing. Or you are trying to establish some grid resilience, some battery storage with microgrid, with some sustainable sources that are working not always like the solar or the wind, even if Africa is a very good place for wind and solar. So energy is very important. AI factory, so far, you don't see today big project. You see some island projects, some small project regarding AI, but not so far big project. It will come, but maybe in 2 years, something like this, it will start. And we are facing also, as all the rest of the planet in data center, a challenge on capacity building. We have excellent data center technicians in Africa, and they are even more excellent than the rest of the world because they don't have the comfort that data center operators have in US and Europe to have excellent infrastructure, excellent grid, excellent water distribution, and access to field engineer for the maintenance that are close to their site. When you are in Abidjan running your data center and you need a field engineer for your cooling system, he will probably come either from Europe or from South Africa, and it's an 8 hours flight, and you don't make travel technician like this. So it's a real nightmare. That's why the African data center operator, technicians, engineers are really seen as ultra resilient technical talent. They know very well their jobs. They can do things that you cannot imagine in Occidental country. And honestly, I want to close this presentation by saying a big bravo to all these engineers and all these technicians, African, that are making their data center work and serve correctly their customer. Thank you very much for your attention. I let the panel debate on this now.
Thank you very much, Paul-Francois. That was a good summary of what is actually a very, very good report, very comprehensive report, and I really do recommend all of you. I think someone's got an open mic. So, moving on from the report, the big takeaway I take from that report is that Africa is a continent of untapped capacity and capability, and it felt like 2025 was a relatively slow year despite all the opportunity. Stefan, do you think that's true? Do you think we are not taking advantage of the opportunities, the capacities that exist in Africa?
Well, I've been leading data center operators since it started as an industry, and I have seen permanently an unbalance between offer and demand one way or another. And it's also the case in Africa. What we've seen is in the late, in 2018, 19, arrival for the first time on the continent of large hyperscale compute platforms in Africa, and they have developed very quickly, which is a good sign of the development of demand for cloud solutions, which means obviously development of data centers to house and host them. And it has gone very, very fast and very, very large. Then in 2022, 2023, we've seen two things happening globally. The first time is the cost of money was higher, meaning the envelope for investment from the hyperscalers was a bit lower. And out of that envelope, the hyperscalers have favored all of a sudden large investment in AI facilities rather than cloud. And that is one of the reasons why the take-up on the African market has slowed down a bit compared to the early 2020s, because the cloud hasn't developed as much due to priority being given to AI, mainly in the US and Europe. But that will have to be caught up, because in the meantime, the cloud demand hasn't stopped and continues to develop. So I am expecting a significant catch-up in cloud-related data center take-up in the future, and that is likely to happen all over the continent.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. We talk a lot about AI, but we seem to be forgetting about cloud. Cloud hasn't gone away, and cloud demand is still growing despite all the talk about AI. Menno, is that something you see? Are you seeing a greater demand? Is there any particular region that you think will become more prominent? And what will be the impact of that wider cloud adoption on co-location requirements, not just in South Africa, but across the entire continent?
Yeah, so thanks, Mark. And Paul, your presentation was really great and insightful, and like down the line, what we're seeing, and it's relevant here. So, I mean, we've got some in our facility, some cloud players, but ultimately cloud, if you really have a look at it, are reasonably limited. I mean, if you take the real cloud players, the top 5, top 6, for example, they're internationals. For example, it's the AWS's, Microsoft's, Google's, Oracle's, etc., the Huawei clouds, Ali clouds, etc., etc. So when they come into the environment, generally their uptake is substantial. And I don't know, Paul-Francois, you mentioned data sovereignty, for example. And ultimately, did you hear the speech the other day from Ursula, the president of the EU? Her first words were, data sovereignty is paramount. That's going to be her first words when she started her speech, data sovereignty. It wasn't about like supporting NATO with paying for war things. This was data sovereignty. That was her first word. And ultimately, I mean, geopolitics has become a big thing now, and way more than what it was some time back. Take South Africa, we're a bit controversial at the moment with certain countries at the moment. And that ultimately shows that we need data sovereignty. It's paramount. We can't be relying on one specific country for all our banking, for a lot of our digitization. We all in one or two cloud providers. And should we be that, or should we be local cloud, or could we be in a cloud provider that is somewhere else and be in one of their DCs? We found, for example, last year when we had 4 links go down in Ivory Coast, I think it was last year, and our whole banking system ultimately went down. We couldn't email, we couldn't do anything. And we were supposed to be data sovereign from that point of view. How do we really think we claim to be data sovereign in those cloud facilities, but we're not? So ultimately, some processing is happening somewhere else, even though we data sovereign. And there needs to be some process put in place. Things that you're talking about, Paul-Francois, that ultimately judges and manages our data sovereignty in each country. Each country needs. There's typically infighting in Africa, for example, a little bit of disagreements with certain things, and you actually need, it proves that each country needs data sovereignty. And as soon as we get that through, we get that through, when those policies really become a reality, you're going to find that South African banks aren't going to be processing for Mozambique, Tanzania, etc., even though they got data sovereignty policies in place. We're still processing, but then our processing then goes into AWS, for example, and then that gets done somewhere in America, but we think it's done here, for example. Actually, I shouldn't be mentioning names. Sorry about that. But typically, how sovereign are we, even though we think we are? And the policies need to be managed and governed in such a way that we really are data sovereign.
Yeah.
Automatically, that way, local data centers will then start flourishing, and the requirement for having those data centers there, I think.
So really, sorry, man, go on.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, so I think really what you're saying from that perspective is it's not actually pure data sovereignty. It's kind of platform or cloud sovereignty as well, isn't it? You need the platform to host the data, and you need to be self-sufficient with the platform and the network connectivity, as well as the data itself.
Yeah, so I think the pretense that we think we're data sovereign isn't really there, and our cloud environments aren't as data sovereign as we think they are, and we need more localization even in the cloud, for example.
Yeah, agreed. So, Paul-Francois, you touched on this to some degree in the report itself, but we have definitely got a shift in the industry when it comes to looking at energy sources, and Africa, as you mentioned and the report mentions, there are lots of opportunities for renewable energy and renewable energy sources, and actually significant capacity. You know, we talk about grid instability, which is true, and actually that's true globally, I think, not just in Africa. But you know, how is the impact of that changing view on energy and energy source leading to sort of benefit in Africa, and how can Africa take advantage of that?
Yeah, so there is many things that could happen with the energy field, because if you start to think that people all over the world, when they build data center, they start to think, okay, I should invest on my own energy generation to power my data center. So here it's a different scheme, because you are investing the data center and the generation to power the data center. And if you start to do this, you can build a big AI data center in South Africa. I'm sure Menno will be very happy to build it, okay? The generation and the data center, because maybe it will be easier for, in Africa, to build this huge power generation with sustainable energy, with wind, with solar, with hydro, with geothermal in Africa. It will be maybe much easier than doing this in US or in Europe, where you have a lot of difficulty, and it's very small and packed country, where we have a lot of place and available in Africa and so on to do this. So it could be an opportunity when you start to think, I need to invest in the power generation as well as in the data center together, something like that.
Yeah, thank you. Stefan, the other thing that was mentioned in the report and that Paul-Francois touched on was the connectivity element. You know, the obviously connectivity is vital for data centers, not having a building without any connectivity. How is that changing in Africa? How is the connectivity changing, and how are the approaches to connectivity changing? And again, how can that be taken advantage of?
There's two levels of answer to this very interesting question. The first level has been touched upon a little bit by Paul-Francois earlier. It is that beyond subsea cables, the terrestrial fiber intercontinental network is yet to reach a level which will allow the digital world as a whole to develop as well as we've been able to see in other continents. You know, certain companies are investing significantly in the terrestrial fiber, and that's going to help a lot. But that is really developing. So, you know, I'm expecting that to become less of an issue. The second thing is regulation of the telecom market. So you may have terrestrial network and you may have international connectivity that can come to a country, but that country is not really willing to let it coming in because of high regulation. I'm not going to state any name, but I'm sure you know, people around the table, the virtual table here, do have those names pretty clear in their mind. And that is something that needs, if those countries want to see a digital world happening with all the benefits of, they need to think of deregulated a little more. But the main issue, and again, it's been touched upon slightly in the presentation at the beginning of the webinar, is availability of connectivity for people. In Europe, in the US, even, you know, in some African countries like South Africa, unlimited connectivity subscriptions is easily available to quite a lot of people. In other regions, in most countries in Africa, that is not the way people get connectivity. They get connectivity per usage, and they pay per usage. So that limits the usage of people obviously a lot, as it's expensive. And Wi-Fi hotspots could solve that, but there's not enough currently on the continent. We were talking about the cloud. There are mainly two different sorts of cloud. There's the business cloud that is developing heavily in Africa, as already mentioned, and then there is the consumer cloud. And the consumer cloud is not very able to develop due to the fact that people, the consumers, do not have available connectivity. I mean, it's no. Why do you think that we are not seeing Apple as a big customer in African data centers? Because they mainly deliver consumer-oriented cloud systems, but people cannot use it because it's too expensive for them. So this is something that needs also to be solved, and we hope that African government will help solving that, in addition to regulate less the telecom market in their countries.
Yeah, thank you. I think regulation is clearly an issue and possibly a barrier in some cases. Menno, we talk about connectivity, and we traditionally think of fiber, copper to an extent, even now. Are there alternatives? There seem to be an increasing amounts of alternative options which don't rely on the connections, or at least the connections up into the air rather than across the ground.
You're asking me because you know the answer. So we're building a lot of the ground stations and involved with quite a few of the new people coming along the block, the ones that are very, very evident. Actually, an ex-South African in one of the environments. And so, I mean, the technology that they're using there is revolutionary, and it's changing the complete space in Africa, I believe. Or it's got the ability to change a complete space, because Africa is quite vast. Or, I mean, it is vast. And the density, if we had to go and put towers in every single place or run fiber, it's just not economical and not worth it. Video stuff is really, it's going to change lives of people. And at the moment, it seems to be too expensive, but it's not. And people are going to create little Wi-Fi spots using the technology, and the bandwidth they get is literally amazing. And Stefan, your connectivity story with the fibers spot on. Look at what Meta and Google are doing around Africa now. There's a new W cable. There's a cable coming down the East Coast. Another one from Meta. And Google's done a great job. They're coming up the south coast of South Africa, going to be running terrestrial as well. And connectivity is changing. Africa is changing substantially. It's exciting because we were left behind, like you were saying earlier, Stefan. And we need to catch up, for example. In some ways, that's a good thing, because we've missed a few generations of data centers which have become legacy nearly already. Data centers are designed slightly different. So we've missed some versions of data centers, and we have to catch up now. And we get the ability to put new. And with connectivity that's coming in, is all these ground stations or earth stations, or whatever you want to call it, for the LEO providers. And it's not only the one that's going to be there, the one's just very far ahead, but all the other guys want to catch up, for example, and it's going to advance, like you were saying, the consumer type cloud, Stefan, where people that didn't have connectivity before, okay, the cost is prohibitive ultimately in some cases, but at least they're going to be connected. They're going to have access to AI platforms to ask questions. They're going to see YouTube for the first time in their lives in certain areas where there was no chance that they could get connectivity before, for example. So I think the new technology from a connectivity point of view gives Africa a huge advantage for potential to grow. And and yeah, it's just going to give us a good platform to start with. It was really prohibitive from a connectivity point of view before, because it's just too big and too vast.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's an opportunity for a leapfrog in technology, and moving away from that traditional dependency on essentially fixed circuits, moving to something a little bit more flexible. Paul-Francois, just on a more generic level, we're seeing a huge evolution in data centers generally, not just in Africa, but generally. We've got AI data centers, which are very, very specific beasts. You can't necessarily put workloads into a data center, AI workloads or AI platforms into a data center that's designed for cloud. What's changing on that front? What are you seeing, and how are we accommodating that change and that development, not just in Africa but worldwide? And is this a disincentive to investment if people aren't quite sure what's going on?
No, really, the technical challenge is the density. So we remember having it took 15 years to pass from 2 kilowatt racks to 15 kilowatt racks, and 15 years ago, 15 kilowatt racks was just a nightmare for most of the data center operator. It was impossible, and now you are talking about 100 kilowatts, and then in 2 years, 200 kilowatt racks. So this is, you imagine, one rack is quite small piece. You have 200 kilowatts that you need to cool down. Okay, so it's like a furnace, hot furnace that you need to cool down. So you need to change. You need to have liquid cooling to be able to cool down these animals. This means that you have to have the sufficient energy access. For example, if you put 5 racks, you need 1 megawatt. So what is your contract with utility to get 1 megawatt? Do you have the correct power station and so on, power? Do you have the correct subscription and so on? Do you need another line? What is the cost for this and so on? Of course, this density will not be accepted easily within the existing data center in Africa or the rest of the world. So you will need to build different animals. Sometimes it could be on the same location, but in a kind of island or a specific island, if you have the power available, which most of the time is very difficult to discuss with the utility and so on. So it's and really you see that all the project, at a big project, because you have data center of 1 gigawatt developing, so even more than all the data centers that you have in Africa. Okay, so you can imagine, and in some state in US, they just cannot. A utility cannot supply this. They are just it's impossible. So they start to think, okay, can we power these animals on the site of the data center to be totally independent from the utility? So it could be gas turbine and so on. But when you are talking 1 gigawatt, it's a small nuclear plant that you need. Okay, so, and they are thinking about this. It will happen this way, but you need to think differently. So this is the issue, and the issue will come in Africa as well. Same thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I see, in Africa, we talk about grid problems, transmission problems, and again, that's not unique to Africa. I think we see the issue is not necessarily generating capacity; it's transmission capacity, and that's true in Europe as well as Africa and the US, etc. And it seems to me that there's a lot of stranded capacity in Africa that could be taken advantage of. A lot of photovoltaic, a lot of wind, etc. And so I think it seems to me, Stefan, that we're going to see more and more data centers being off grid. Not necessarily using the grid itself, because the grid cannot supply the power we need. So, one of the things I see in Africa is a lot of stranded capacity, be it hydro, geothermal, PV, wind. Is that a trend that you think will accelerate? Is that something that you're going to see more of in Africa? And that should be where, investors are looking to take advantage of that stranded capacity that's not sitting on the grid.
this is a major trend which is going to happen worldwide.
Yeah.
Because worldwide energy is expensive, complicated to continue developing, not necessarily good for the climate the way it's used. There are still a lot of countries using coal or fossil fuels and even solar is not carbon neutral. I mean, it is to manufacture solar components. It's not that great for the environment, and then it has to be shipped and all of those things. So we got to be very careful there in terms of what's green and what's not. And we may well end, as Paul-Francois just mentioned, and I do believe in that, in situation where nuclear is going to be the ultimate solution. Now, coming back to your question, yes, now in a lot of countries in the world, there is a consciousness of the communities that on one hand, data centers and the digital world, which is hosted in the data centers, because people think it's data centers consuming energy, but it's not. It's the servers inside the digital world. Actually, data centers are reducing their impact on the environment by mutualizing everything around them. But yes, they are useful, but they are now having an impact on the consumption of energy. So data centers will have to think of producing their own energy, and so being off-grid, as you said. And we will probably very clearly see a situation where not only they will produce their own energy, but they may well produce energy in addition to their own needs, which they can give back to the grid.
Yeah, and that community benefit, I think, is one way to encourage governments or regions to actually accept data center development, because they're actually giving more back to the community, be it power, be it heat, whatever.
And the other thing, it's been mentioned at some point during the conversation that is really important when we talk about environment is water, obviously. I mean, power is one thing, but there are still some technologies used in data center to reduce PUE. So it increases PWE.
Yeah.
Typically, adiabatic systems have a low PUE, but they use a lot of water. So that is something that will not be possible to continue. We as an industry need to really also consider water as a critical resource and use technologies which are in closed circuits, for example, that do not permanently use water.
No, and certainly that.
Sorry, just saying that it's a trend that is also developing, and fortunately, adiabatic systems are now less and less used.
Yeah, certainly in Europe, we're using less and less water. But I think you're quite right. We can use more water, but we get a benefit on the PUE side. But I also think it's very regionally specific, and I think this is particularly an issue in Africa. There are lots of parts of Africa that are very have a water scarcity issue, but there's actually other parts of Africa that are very water rich. Using water is only a problem if you don't have much of it, or you're damaging the environment in utilizing it. So I think it's
power.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very nuanced conversation. Menno, coming back to you on this, the whole energy issue. We talk about more renewables, etc., and typically PV and wind. We're supplying DC current. And I also know that the coming Vera Rubin chipsets in 27, something of that nature, will be looking at DC distribution to the rack. So are we seeing a fundamental change potentially in the way that we design data centers, particularly the high density data centers? And do you think DC power is going to be something that we see more of, both into the data center, but actually within the data center too.
Yeah, so Mark, I mean, we were at the conference in Switzerland and we basically spoke about that quite a bit. And I was in the Middle East last week with Capacity and Data Cloud there. And if you, the talk over there, we're talking about it now. You just hear data sovereignty, AI, direct-to-chip cooling, renewables. Those things just keep the same panel discussion again and again and again. Similar things that we're talking about now. And also talking about rack loads going 10 kilowatts, 6 kilowatts, like you were saying, Paul-Francois, the 10 kilowatts. Then when they came with 100, 130 kilowatts a rack, I said, no, these guys are crazy. They don't understand what they're talking about. But the people who say they're now running 130 kilowatts a rack, the racks are running at 130. With the Blackwell chips, for example, 130. And the talk is now with Ruben, 1 megawatt racks. And like I said, no at 100. It is a 1 megawatt rack, 1.2 megawatt a rack with Ruben. Can you imagine 1 megawatt, 2 racks, 2 megawatts? It's a generator per 2 racks, for example.
It's insane, isn't it?
The direct-to-chip cooling, it just goes in. So I mean, a little bit off topic, but so there's a group that's building Stargate in Abu Dhabi. Just the construction side, there are 9,500 people on site for the first 200 megawatts. And it's a 1.5 gigawatt facility, for example. They're going to be 12,500 people soon. And they're building this data center and ultimately call it for Blackwell or whatever the chip is now. But, and let's say they've designed it for 100 kilowatts a rack, like you were saying just now, Paul-Francois. And all of a sudden next year, and the plan is to build the next 300, but NVIDIA come up with Ruben, and all of a sudden it's 1 megawatt rack. What do you do with the space of the other 9 racks? And how are you going to power this one? Does your whole data center change completely, for example? And I think a word that came out of this next discussion, it might not be relevant to Africa, but it might. We don't know. I mean, if the Middle East is potentially getting it wrong from one chip to another, and these things take 2-3 years to build, how are we supposed to forecast? So I think one big word is agility, for example. Making your data centers and your environments as agile as possible, and the people that are adapt and make their facilities and their people the most agile are going to be able to work in the environment. So then coming back, I mean, ultimately this 800 volts DC thing, it's going to happen. It is designed in the new Ruben chip, for example. It's been spoken about for 15, 20, 25 years. I've been so excited about it then. I've forgotten about it. It's been talked about. Now it's back. And now it is there, for example. We were talking about now 800 volts is actually still too little when you're talking about gigawatt facilities. And if you're talking about one rack at 1 megawatt, how do you power 20 racks at 20 megawatts with an 800 volt DC system? And they were talking about you can't have 800 volts as you need to have 30, like we were talking about 11 or 6 kV DC distribution. They're not talking 20 kV DC distribution. It's going to 36 kV for the DC distribution as primary DC distribution to then break down 800 volt components to feed each rack. But now you've got to keep your data center people away from the 36 kV and I feed through a plenum for the 800 volt environments, for example. And can you imagine the dynamic shift in how data centers work if you have DC distribution? So your generators don't have to synchronize on AC, for example. They'll generate onto a rectifier 36 kV, for example. Your mains coming in is 36 kV. If you've got PV, for example, comes in straight with DC. Your battery system is a DC with buck boost facilities. It changes the whole data center environment completely. Like what you're used to from data centers to this. But I mean, nevertheless, it makes data centers very exciting, and I love this stuff. But it's for change, and I mean, I don't expect the 1 megawatts to be here now, and I didn't expect it in my lifetime. A 1 megawatt rack. I still don't think it's real, but they proved me wrong with 100 kilowatts the other day. You know, so I'd like to see it, and I'd like Africa to have a shot at seeing this high capacity stuff or higher density see and learn about it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this morning that there was an announcement from Cassava talking about developing AI factories actually in South Africa. So, I wonder if that's where we're going. And it is a very much a question of watching this space, getting involved, because it will change. There's no doubt, not just in Africa, but worldwide. We're going through I think a huge revolution in many respects. Paul-Francois, I was going to come to you anyway, but you had a question, I think.
No, I just wanted to comment on the innovation. We are not at the end of the innovation. We are at the start of the innovation. Okay, so at each step of the innovation, you have new challenges. And you are thinking, okay, with the existing technology, this is impossible challenges and so on. You're going to have 2 gigawatt racks, 1 megawatt racks, and things like this and so on. The DC war is there since 150 years. Most of the telecom data center in the 60s were on DC power. All of them, okay? But the data center industry with the server didn't build on DC, they build on AC. Okay, so this it could be a solution, but maybe not. This war is for since 150 years. The future could come from something totally different. So you have the Rabin chip. What about quantum computing?
Yeah,
you need 10,000 less power to power the same computation in quantum computing. When it will be solved, maybe all this energy issue will be solved by quantum computing. Maybe maybe not. I'm not sure, but you see, it's very open.
And then we start talking about liquid helium and the challenges of liquid helium as a cooling medium, not just water or other fluids. So I think we're definitely in a state of change. But bring the conversation back to Africa. I think one of the key things, and it really is my final question, I think, but one of the key things I think is talent. Where's the talent coming from to run these sites? We know, going back to what you were saying earlier, Paul-Francois, there's a huge pool of talent in Africa, but how do we develop that talent? How do we make use of it? And probably more importantly, how do we keep it in Africa and not allow people to go and get, very well paid jobs in the US or Europe or beyond? So I think talent's a key question. And so how do you think we should and are possibly addressing it now?
So we are. It's a key question, and we have some people in our board are really on it right now. We want to have some database of real excellent talent. We want also to be sure that we develop this talent with partnership with university, where we explain that some basic course and lessons should be certified, easy certification and so on. So we have this kind of minimum basic talent, because you have no university in the world that teach data center.
Correct.
Okay? You have engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, and so on, but they are developed for any type of activity. There is no specific data center universities as such. There is some MOOC on data center university. Some of the equipment vendor has developed some excellent course. And if we help African students to understand the need that will be from the data center in Africa, to understand what kind of course existing MOOC are available, that they can, if they certify 2 or 3 of them, they will be in our database for the benefit of our data center operator or our equipment contractor and vendor and so on, that we will have something good. But also there will be always the risk to have our talent stolen by US and Europe, and we need to keep them in Africa. We need also to seduce the diaspora. There is many African origin, excellent technician in Europe and in US that want to be back in Africa. We want to seduce them as well.
Yeah, that I think is a key point, isn't it? Bring the talent back, not just keep the talent, but bring talent back as well. Stefan, same question to you. You know, it's a huge issue. So, do you have a view on it?
Let's train people.
Yeah.
It's training and training and training and training,
Yeah.
and you know, we data center people have a big sense of community, and that is fortunate. Let's use it, and have a view that goes beyond business, because our role is to develop the digital world in a continent for which that digital world is going to mean a significant modification in their lives as citizens, and potentially unlocking a lot of the capacity and the dynamism that Africa natively has, and that is the role of the data centers on the continent. Let's do that with the Africans. We are all Africans, or partially at least on this call, and that is also something. It is beyond the job. We're also having a mission to create the African digital world an African way, rather than always replicate what is happening elsewhere. And that goes with training. And we should organize that ourselves. You know, I've recently read an article, I mean, it was this morning actually, where Microsoft announced that they will finance the exams, certifying exams for 50,000 people in Africa.
Wow.
But that gives you the magnitude. And I'm super happy they're doing it. But let's also have African companies do the same.
Agreed. Final word on this one to you, Menno. You know, you're obviously intimately involved with talent in not just in South Africa but beyond. So again, final word to you on that.
Yeah, so Stefan mentioned we're all Africans and slightly African, yeah, and so I'm hoping the next South Africa-France game that you're all going to be South Africa and ensuring that you're happy. Yeah.
I'm sorry, there seems to be a technical issue with my. Can't really hear what you
can hear you.
The way, honestly, as a neutral observer, I would love to see a South Africa-France game right now. That would be a hell of a game. The two teams are in such good shape. So, okay.
Sorry, I mean, doesn't work really well.
Yeah. So, I mean, we always short of talent, and like Paul-Francois mentioned right in the beginning, literally Africa has got challenges that the other data center nations don't really face. It's like you said, its power is terrible. Environments are quite harsh in some cases. You don't have the spare around the corner, so you need to make do with what you have to. You don't have the expertise everywhere. You become the expert of everything ultimately, and it breeds a certain character in the environment that when that guy does look after his environment, he becomes the ability to service a broad spectrum of things. You might not become the designer of each component, but you become you know how changeovers work. Most of the UK and American people have never seen a generator start in their lives for the real reason. You know, we see it 3-4 times a day, and we see what generators do. We see what ATSs do. We see what cooling systems do. UPSs really run on batteries in Africa, for example. So the guys really do, but they do need a bit of less chaos that we have to face. Yeah. So having these discussions about training, and Stefan, you're right. We can try and lure these people back. We try and keep them. Ultimately, we have to let them fly. If they want to go to other countries, there's space for more. And we've got lots of people that are unemployed in Africa. Let's train so that we can put them in place, because stopping them from going doesn't allow for the next job. I know it creates chaos, but we need jobs in the place. And if the rest of the world want to take our people, let's keep on training. We'll have less unemployed ultimately. But training is definitely the answer. It is just difficult, and it's nice to plan training, but we're facing chaos at the front line most of the time.
Yeah.
Like Paul-Francois is saying, the guys are really busy. Now, to take a good guy and spend time training is difficult, and to train on live environments is also a challenge. For example, there's solutions to all these problems, but ultimately training is what we need, and it's great to give people opportunity in Africa that they have actually got no opportunity.
Yeah, 100%, Menno. So we are well over time. Amy did give me the opportunity to spend a little bit more time going through it. So if I may, Amy, I just want one question to each of the panelists. Their predictions for 26-27. And gents, if you could keep it relatively brief, headlines only. What do you see coming 26 and 27? What differences? Menno, starting with yourself.
So I'm bullish about data centers. Data centers is really going to grow. Digitization has to be there. I have no clue how big. I don't have any clue what African racks are going to look like. But I know we're going to be agile, and I know we're going to be able to adapt, and we want digitization. Yeah, Africa is going to grab it with both hands, and I'm looking forward to sharing the journey with all of you.
Brilliant, thanks, Menno. Paul-Francois?
No, I think I'm very optimistic on the African data center market opportunity. Africa has a lot to bring to this community as well, because the reaction to the different event of life are different, and we have to learn about this, and we can help a lot the rest of the global data center industry in the way we are working in very harsh environment and so on. The data center capacity will double in the next 2 years. It will again double the 5 years after in Africa. We need a lot of people. We need a lot of talent. And they will go somewhere, but it's good for Africa as well. Okay, sometime, and we will train other people, and it will work like this. And I'm very confident in the African citizen, in the African technician, and in the African data center market. Very confident.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And finally, Stefan.
I think we're going to see a lot of diversification of geographies. New countries will see new data centers opening. Diversification in customer base. It's been in Africa heavily relying for the moment. If you see globally, not necessarily in South Africa, but I mean in Africa as a whole, it's mainly around enterprise. We're going to see more governments. We're going to see more various enterprises and hyperscale, and it's going to diversify the customer base heavily, which will lead to a diversification of technologies as well, because it's not the same technology and design for AI typically than for enterprise, and which is the current status of the market. So we see diversifications everywhere, which leads to a situation, as Menno said, where we just don't know, which is fascinating, exciting, and which will need agility. But the one thing that will not change is we need to get African data back to Africa. And that is the mission we all have.
Yeah. That's a great point to end on. Thank you. So thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing your views. Thanks for fighting some of the technological challenges of getting online. Thanks everybody out there for listening to us. I believe, and you'll confirm, but I believe the webinar will be available. And finally, thanks to StepX for giving us the opportunity to talk. And we look forward to seeing you all in Johannesburg in late June. We'll see you there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I just want to apologise again for the technical issues today. We will investigate, but I hope you still really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you to Mark, Menno, Stefan and Paul-Francois for managing it so smoothly. We did not get to all of your questions, but we will do a follow-up and we will get them answered. But I think what we can take from this is that 2026 will, if not already, is going to be a good year. So just for kind of dates for diary, the next webinar is on the 18th of March. We'll be talking all things investment, and we've got another good, exciting panel of speakers lined up. So do keep an eye out for registration. And also just want to say, with the opportunity that we hope that, those of you that have joined today can come and join us in Johannesburg in June. Do register your place. It's www.datacenters-africa.com. Thank you again, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
A great panel.